Escape Pod, Episode 628, The Endangered Camp, by Anne Leckie.
Hello, and welcome to Escape Pod, your weekly science fiction podcast. I'm Divya, your host for this episode. Our story this week is The Endangered Camp by Anne Leckie. It was first published in 2009 in the anthology Clockwork Phoenix 2, edited by Mike Allen. Anne Leckie is the author of the Hugo, Nebula, and Arthur C. Clarke award-winning novel Ancillary Justice. She is also an alumna of Escape Artists, having been the assistant editor of Podcastle for its founding years. Her Hugo-nominated novel Provenance will be available in paperback this July. Your narrator this week is Iba Armankas. Iba is a writer-director currently based in Los Angeles. Her darkly comedic genre sensibilities are showcased in 2 web series and a feature film forthcoming later this year. One day, she will find time to make a website. But in the meantime, you can follow her projects and adventures on Twitter or Instagram. Now, get ready for some interesting space travel, because it's story time.
The Endangered Camp. After the terrible push to be free of the Earth was past, we could stand again. In a while, the engineers had said everything would float, but for now we were still accelerating. We were 8 in the small round room, though there were others in the skyboat. Engineers and nest guardians, examining the eggs we had brought to see how many had been lost in the crushing upward flight. But we 8 stood, watching the world recede. The walls and the floor of the room were a smooth gold metal. Around the low ceiling was a pattern of cycad fronds, and under this, scenes from the histories. There was the first mother, ancestor to us all, who broke the shell of the original egg. The picture showed the egg, a single claw of the mother piercing that boundary between inside and outside. With her was the tiny figure of her mate. If you're from the mountains, you know that he ventured forth and fed on the carcass of the world beast, slain by the mother, and in due time found the mother and mated with her. If you are a lowlander, he waited in the shell until she brought the liver to him, giving him the strength to come out into the open. Neither was pictured. The building of the skyboat had taken the resources of both mountains and lowlands. On another panel was Strongclaw, her sharp-toothed snout open in a triumphant call. She stood tall on powerful legs, each foot with its arced killing claw, sharp and deadly. Her arms stretched out before her, claws spread, and her long, stiff tail stretched behind. The artist had worked with such skill that every feather could be distinguished. Behind her was the great tree that had carried her across the sea, and in the water were pictured its inhabitants, coiled ammonites, hungry sharks, and a giant mosasaur, huge-mouthed enough to swallow a person down at a gulp. Before Strongclaw was a forested land, full of food for the hunting, new territory for her and her daughters, yet unhatched. A third panel showed the first skyboat, departing for the moon that had turned out to be farther away than our ancestors had ever imagined. That voyage had been a triumph. The skyboat, designed, all were ceaselessly told, by lowlander engineers, had achieved its seemingly impossible goal. But it had also been a disaster, as the mountain engineers had predicted and the lowlanders refused to believe until the last, irrefutable moment. There had been no air on the moon. But as we now set our sights on Mars, the artist had left off the end of the tale to avoid ill omen. The engineers had used mirrors to cast an image of the Earth on the last blank panel of the curved wall. It was this that held our attention. As we watched, disaster struck. A sudden, brilliant flash whited out the image for an instant, and after that, an expanding ring began to spread across the face of the world, as though a pebble had been dropped into a pond. Almost instantly, a ball of fire rose up from the center of that ripple and expanded outwards, obscuring it. I blinked, slowly, deliberately, sure that my vision was at fault. Still the fire grew until finally it dissipated, leaving a slowly expanding veil of smoke. There was silence in the skyboat for some time. Out of the speaking tube came the quiet voice of an engineer in the chamber below us. A great stone from the void. There are many such, it seems, but no song speaks of them, no history tells us what happens when one strikes the earth. This would not hinder the engineers, who are full of predictions and calculations. I was not informed, said White Ring into the tube. She was facing the image, her back to us. Why? We did not know, came the faint voice of the engineer. Do we not watch the skies? The skies are vast. The stones are dark. We might have seen it if we looked in precisely the right place at the right time. Or perhaps not. And now? Around me, not a feather stirred. The cloud will continue to expand. The impact will leave a crater. Here, the voice hesitated. My colleague thinks perhaps 25 to 35 leagues wide, though I believe she has miscalculated the object's size. Perhaps 45 to 60 leagues. White Ring's killing claw clicked on the floor. I have not calculated how long it will take the cloud to disperse, the engineer continued. I fear it will grow to cover the whole world. There may be fires as rocks fall back down to the ground. It hit water, so... Silence, ordered White Ring. How far will the damage reach? A moment of silence from the tube. It depends, came the voice, slowly, carefully, on how thick the cloud is, and how long it stands between the earth and the sun, and if there are fires, and other things we haven't calculated yet. For just a moment, White Ring's feathers ruffled as though a breeze had stirred them. Nearly every other face was turned towards the view of earth, but I looked at her, sidelong, without moving my snout. I felt the muscles in my back and my legs tense, and I forced them to relax, lest the click of my largest claw on the deck betray my thoughts. We must go back, White Ring said. Snouts turned towards her in surprise. She turned her head to look behind her and then turned fully, her daughter ducking low to avoid her tail. Others in the ring ducked and turned so that all who had faced forward could now face the center of the circle. We can stay above until the cloud dissipates, and then land. Can we go back? One of the younger females. We must, said White Ring. Her tone admitted no dispute. This venture was risk enough when the world was safe behind us. If we are the only ones left alive. White Ring's daughter called through the speaking tube, and an answer came back. We might be able to if we act soon enough. We'll have to make some calculations, but... Make them, said White Ring. Her daughter eyed the rest of us, watching. They had told us that leaving Earth would be difficult. 3 of our number had died in the punishing climb, but all of us standing here had survived it. Could those so silent and still around me be willing to throw that away? To throw away everything we had worked for? It seemed so. The engineer had said, if we act soon enough. A question of fuel, no doubt. If I did not speak up now, the time would be gone. But here was my difficulty. Every other person in the room was a lowlander. The superiority of mountain optics had ensured that some of the engineers aboard were Highlanders. But I was one of only 2 surviving who was not either an engineer or an egg tender. If I spoke now, no one else would speak in support of me, unless they were completely convinced of my argument. Or unless I killed White Ring, in which case they would likely follow me out of fear, if nothing else. But as things stood, I would not be allowed to strike. But I am no coward. We must not go back, I said. My neighbors sidled away as far as they could into the cramped space, claws clicking on the metal floor. I stood face to face with White Ring. I hear nothing, said White Ring. Her killing claw tapped once, twice. This ship won't be built again, I said. Not in our lifetimes. Look! I gestured at the picture with one clawed finger, at the still spreading smoke. Will we reach Mars, or will we die having made all this effort and accomplished nothing? White Ring looked around the circle, watching the faces and the demeanors of the others. I did not dare take my eyes off her to make the same survey. I hear nothing, she said again. Coward! You disgrace our ancestors! Instantly, White Ring's neck snaked forward, and she snapped her teeth together, a breath from my neck. I stood, still as stone. Will you challenge me? White Ring hissed. At this time? Is your ambition so great? I would not allow my feathers to lift or flutter. I would not allow a single twitch that I did not intend. Did Strongclaw turn back? I asked. I would have pointed to the picture, but I did not wish to move. She knew that all was well behind her, said White Ring. If none survive on Earth and we die attempting Mars, what then? We don't know that there's air to breathe where we're going, said the daughter beside White Ring, when I didn't answer. There was none on the moon. What a wonder this is. You lowlanders disbelieved when the engineers from the mountain said there was no air on the moon. Now you disbelieve when you are told that Mars certainly has an atmosphere. Bent light, White Ring began, her voice scornful. There is more than just the bending of light to prove it. There are plants, the astronomers have said so. We see them wax and wane with the seasons. There is no reason to think that Mars will not be much like Earth. The astronomers are not all agreed, not even those from the mountains. But you have staked your life on it, I pointed out. Well, other lives were sure to continue, said White Ring. What if everyone else is dead? Then they are dead because Earth is now unlivable, I said. And in that case, why turn back? I know your ambition of old, said White Ring. I had not thought you would exercise it at a time like this. My feathers twitched then. I couldn't avoid it. I allowed them to tremble and rise. White Ring and her daughter watched me with malice, the other 5 with fear or perhaps something else. The moment stretched out. Time. Time might be an enemy or an ally. Prolong the contention, and the moment to turn back would have passed. Allow the return to begin, and there would be only a short space, if any at all, in which it would be possible to correct our course. You call me ambitious, I said. And I am. I would reach Mars. Did any of us embark without a similar ambition? But now you abandon all that we have worked so hard to attain. And when I point this out, I am threatened. Why is this? If one of you, and here I pointed around the circle, had spoken, would this have been the response? Had I seen movement among the others? Someone about to speak, some thoughtful twitch of feathers. You may kill me if you like, as I am clearly outnumbered, but it will not change the truth. One of those who had been silent spoke. There is something in what she says. White Ring was silent a moment. It would be best not to fight, she said. I would not lose any more of us. Bring out the histories. Bring out the histories, I agreed. She scratched at the unyielding metal ground with her foot, never taking her eyes off me. Then she barked a short order to her daughter, who repeated White Ring's word into the speaking tube. The ladder well was behind me. I did not look as I heard the singer climbing into the room, or move as he squeezed path into the center of the circle in front of White Ring. I never moved my eyes from her, and let the others shift to let him by. He was shorter than most of the males, and his feathers were a dull brown, specked with black. He was an unprepossessing thing, until he opened his mouth, as I well knew. He was my son. He lowered his head in front of White Ring. "You choose first," she said to me. I should have been daunted. If I chose first, hers would be the last word. But I was not. "I choose Strong Claw's Voyage," I said. We are all susceptible to the power of song. The songs you've known since hatching, in the mouths of a great singer, will quicken your pulse and stop your breath. As my son called out the opening lines of the history I had chosen, all in the room were compelled by his voice to listen. Feathers ruffled and then settled, and all were still, and there was no sound but his song. There is no need to give the details here. The story is told, in its essentials, in the picture on the wall of the skyboat, and in any event, I might have chosen anything from the histories I wished, so long as White Ring would feel safe making the obvious choice when her turn came. No, the song and its argument is already clear to you. Instead, I will tell you about my son. When I was younger and looking for a mate, I had resolved to have only the strongest, wiliest man I could find. I wanted large, strong daughters. I wanted children who would distinguish themselves on a hunt. I turned down suitors who were stupid or weak or too short. Some I killed. I would have killed the little brown-feathered thing that approached me last. But he opened his mouth and sang. His voice. I lost all reason. When the first clutch of eggs hatched, I had 5 daughters and 6 sons. 3 of the daughters seemed strong enough. 3 of the males were small and weak, and I thought they might die. But one of those, as I bent near to the tiny, naked-looking thing, let out one barely audible peep. I ate the 4 weaklings and fed them to him. His health was all my care in the coming months, and he grew strong. He was undersized, but he was clever. I taught him all that I could, and when the day came, that comes for all male children, the day to leave his mother and sisters behind forever, I instructed him to seek out the Singers' Guild. For most mothers, when that day comes, it is as though they never had male children. The boys go off to other territories, and if they're seen again, the sight raises no sentiment in the breast of the formerly doting mother. Your daughters are your life. Your sons cease to exist when they leave the nest. But I took what steps I could to ensure that my son would be mine, no less than my daughters, even after he had gone to the Singers' Guild. I didn't know then that I would be on the skyboat, or that a giant rock would hurtle out of the heavens and destroy the earth. And even had I known, I could not have predicted that the lowland singer would die during the launch, leaving my boy the only historian on the ship. But I knew that a singer's voice has a power entirely different from claws and teeth. White Ring had said that she knew my ambition of old, but she did not realize its true extent. The song ended. Strongclaw, victorious through all dangers, never turning back though she knew not what the end of her voyage would be, stood at last on the shore of the land she had discovered. Every listener sighed to hear it. It is an old song and a pleasing one, with a clear lesson. The strong and resolute prevail. It was no more than I had already said, and as I had hoped, expected, White Ring answered with the Endangered Camp. It is a story even older than Strongclaw's. It begins when a party of hunters go out looking for iguanodon. I myself have never seen an iguanodon, but they thunder through the oldest stories in vast herds. They leave behind them in the woods their camp, a nursery. Mounds of earth and leaves, the singer sang, the infants waiting for their time to come forth, and the guardians of the nest watchful. An idyllic scene, but while the hunters are gone, the camp is attacked. The beasts, tearing claws and rending teeth, kill one guardian, and the others circle the nest as well they can, and cry out together, "Let the hunting party return!" Close around me, the listeners were rapt and their eyes wide, and they barely breathed. Such was the power of the singer's voice. The hunting party did return, of course. They heard the cries of the guardians and ran with desperate speed back to the camp. 3 guardians were killed and 4 hunters, but they drove off the beast, saved the eggs, saved the pack. So the history tells us. Now this is the strange thing about history. When we are in doubt as to what course to take, or there is some debate, we examine the histories, we say, so our ancestors did then, and so we should do now. And we think of the past as a solid, unbreakable rock that will always have the same form. But by accident or design, the rock is shaped. A singer drops a line here, a verse there, knowing or unknowing. And if you change the past, you change the future. Stop with the beast defeated and the egg safe, and the salutary moral is clear. The lowlander singers I have heard had always stopped there. But it's not the end of the story. The 4 dead hunters had been among the most experienced. Many of the others were injured, and food was scarce that year anyway. The 7 dead from the attack fed the pack for a while. But after that they plundered the nests to survive, and no children were born that year. I did not think White Ring would expect the singer to continue, even if she knew the ending. The ill omen of it would be too strong. Any singer would know what she meant by requesting it, and know, if he knew the end, to leave it off. But oh, my clever boy, he sang the rest of the song. For a moment, as he continued where she had expected him to stop, she stood paralyzed. The others blinked in surprise, but his voice transfixed them, and they were silent. White Ring drew her head back, and I saw her killing claw twitch. Even so, she waited until he had finished. "You made that up," accused White Ring's daughter when he fell silent. White Ring still held her threatening pose, ready to strike. But she dared not touch the singer. There was no other on board. "You are very young," I said, my leg muscles tense with the desire to jump. It's fashionable these days to leave that verse off, but anyone of any experience and education knows that's how the story ends. I swiveled my snout towards White Ring and bared my teeth. "Isn't that so?" "I have never heard it," said White Ring, still poised to strike. Her gaze was fixed on the boy, a small, brown-specked shape in the middle of the circle. "You have violated your obligation as a singer. Why? There can have been no collusion. Can you have done such a terrible thing merely out of a hatred of lowlanders?" Even if I had told her that he was mine, she would not have been able to imagine why such a thing would matter. And besides, he had sung truly. I might have laughed, but I did not. This was a dangerous moment. "I have heard it," said a quiet voice. The others turned their heads, but I never took my eyes off White Ring. She never took her eyes off my son. "My great-aunt's mate was a singer," the voice continued. I placed it. A sturdy, handsome male, grey and black-feathered, still young. He had kept quiet before now, as was proper. He died when I was still a chick, but I remember he sang it just that way. Silence, and then, even more timidly than before, "I was surprised to hear it requested. I wondered if you would signal the singer to leave the ending off. But then I thought, he won't sing the ending. No one ever has except my uncle." White Ring and her daughter would have no qualms about killing the black and grey male. They drew their heads back, hissing. In that instant, a voice came from the speaking tube. "We have completed our calculations." The low ceiling made it impossible to jump. Instead, I drew my head back and then struck forward with all the force I could muster, hoping the boy would be quick enough to move out of the way. The room erupted into screams and shouts. My teeth snapped together where White Ring's neck had been an instant before. I grabbed her shoulder, and as she raked me with her claws, I brought up my foot with its deadly killing claw. White Ring grabbed me and sank her teeth into my shoulder, but she was too late. My foot came up, and I drove my claw into her belly and pulled my leg convulsively back. Her jaws opened in a scream, and I let go of her and stepped back. The black and grey male was locked with the daughter. No one else was in the room. They must have fled down the ladder well. "You are dead, White Ring," I said. Pink entrails sagged out of the bleeding slash in her belly. I need only keep out of reach for a while. Return to Earth, she said. What if we are all that is left? I wanted to take a step back and lean against the wall, but I wasn't sure if she still had enough strength for a last charge, and I didn't want to show any weakness. You have doomed us, she said, and fell to her knees and then onto her side, guts squirting out with the force of her fall. Still, I did not approach. Until she was reliably dead, she was a danger. Instead, I looked over at the black and grey male, who stood now over the daughter's corpse. His feathers drooped and he was covered in blood, whose it was impossible to tell. Are you hurt? I asked. I hoped he wasn't. He was handsome and obviously strong. Yes, he said. Go down to the doctor. On your way, inform the engineers of the change in command. He bowed his head low and limped to the ladder well. My son had climbed up and made way for him. I stepped over to the daughter and pushed her with my foot. She was dead. Carefully, tentatively, I did the same for her mother. Dead. Well, my chick, I said, there will be new songs, and they will be yours. I turned to see him standing at the well. He bobbed his head. We had always understood each other. My shoulder hurt, and my neck where I had been clawed. I would have to see the doctor soon enough myself, but not this very moment. I turned around to see the image of the smoking, burning Earth. Earth is dead, or if it is not, it may as well be. Mars will be ours. If anyone still lived on Earth, perhaps one day they would venture away from the world and find, on Mars, the evidence of our triumph. Let cowards retreat. We go forward. We live.
And that's our story. Anne has this to say about it. Back when I was first writing and seriously submitting stories, I had read an interview with John Joseph Adams, who at the time was reading Slush for the magazine of fantasy and science fiction. The interviewer asked what he wished he saw more of in FNSF's Slush Pile, and he replied that he would love to see more dinosaurs, stories about Mars, and post-apocalyptic fiction. I thought that was an amusing combination and wondered if anyone would try to send in a post-apocalyptic dinosaurs on Mars story. It only took about a week for me to be struck suddenly by the possibility of writing such a thing. Well, I'm glad Anne went beyond possibility to realizing this story. While it's not the first or last story about intelligent dinosaurs in space, this one captures a particularly poignant moment in the history of the Earth. It's as much about how hubris can lead a species to destroy itself as it is a cheeky imagining of our favorite long-extinct reptiles. There have been 5 mass extinction events on Earth, and some scientists think we are living through and creating the 6th. Much like humans, the protagonist of this story is so very sure about Mars that she's willing to turn her back on every living being on her home planet. It's ironic to think that if this story were true, the ending is a tragedy. There's no air on Mars, and there were no dinosaurs waiting for our rovers when we landed on it. It's much more fun for me to think of this story as alternate history, a way for the dinosaurs to have survived, to have been right in their decision to keep moving forward, because running back to save the endangered camp can become its own tragedy. It brings to mind the thinking of modern, not always empathetic visionaries who see space travel as an insurance card for humanity. I applaud their goals, even if I don't always agree with their pessimistic outlook. My hope is that we can realize our nearsightedness and save the Earth even as we explore outward. Who knows? Maybe if we're really lucky, we'll find some dinosaurs waiting for us. Escape Pod is a production of Escape Artists Inc. and is brought to you with a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives license. Don't change it, don't sell it, do go forth and share it. Escape Pod relies on the generous donations of our listeners. We are now on Patreon, listed as EA Podcasts. Patreon is a platform for fans like you to donate and support creative efforts like ours. It also comes with exclusive subscriber content. If you enjoyed our story this week, consider going to escapepod.org or patreon.com and vote for more stories about singing dinosaurs. Our opening and closing music is by Daikaiju at daikaiju.org. And our closing quotation this week is from a paper in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, which concludes, "One must never forget that Earth's capacity to support life, including human life, has been shaped by life itself." Thanks for listening, and enjoy your auditory adventures through time and space.